Hello guys and welcome. This is Big Dan Bates for Bates Photography, and today we're going to talk about tonal development. I don't know if that's a real word, but that's what we're using because we are going to be working in tone curve and split toning. I'm also going to touch base on the HSL module because we are messing with tones with that, but we're strictly dealing with tonal development today as far as giving your picture that extra edge. Now, I am by no means an expert developer. I would consider myself intermediate. I'm good at what I do. I'm kind of a purist. I try to keep things simple. I just do a development in Lightroom the same as you would do a development in a darkroom. I bring out and balance everything that's physically there without altering it. But as you grow as a professional, you have to start adapting and doing things to suit certain needs. So I've been really working and practicing a little bit here on what I'm calling tonal development. And we're going to have 3 examples here. And my videos tend to run long. I tend to be chatty. So we're going to get right to this. So we're going to have, for this first example here, this is the lovely Nikki DiPietro. And we shot this down on a farm that we use sometimes. And we're going to be using the tone curve for this one. So anytime you're using the tone curve, let me turn this off and go to the standard tone curve. So here's your standard tone curve. Anytime you're working in the tone curve, here's like your histogram. It kind of shows you where everything's living. You're broken down into 4 quadrants: shadows, darks, lights, and highlights. So anywhere you grab, depending on where you're at, for instance, in the darks here, I can grab that and I can lift the darks or lower the darks. I believe the darks are equivalent to blacks, and then shadows are your shadows. Highlights are highlights. No different than the sliders up above in the basics, but this will give you adjustments on top of those sliders. Let you fine tune things how you may like it. We're just going to reset that. When you're using this, you can go up and down, but not left and right. For our purposes today, and my personal preference when I do use the tone curve, which isn't very often, is I activate the point curve. And with the point curve, if I grab either of these end markers, once that turns to arrows, I can bring it straight in. And that's great for what I'm going to show you today. But in general, if you go in any of these regions, you can grab them and you can move wherever you want freely. Now, that causes some pretty, undesirable effects. So whenever you're working in the tone curve, especially as a beginner, you have to experiment. You have to tinker with it. See what works for you. What's the effect you're looking for. Grab different points. And as you make new points, it's going to pivot off the previous point. The more points you make and the more goofy this line gets, the more crazy your photo gets. My advice to anybody who's doing this, if you're making adjustments, stay on, near, or in the relative vicinity of that center dotted line. This way you can't go too far off the rails and you can come back. Now within this one we have RGB, which is a general setting. So this affects everything equally across the board. So I can do a general, and again, I come up and then I bring it into that center line. I live on that center line. And we can do a generalized matte simply by doing that one adjustment. But let's say you want to do, in this case, a retro matte. She's in a retro dress. Let's do a retro matte. You can come in here and address individual colors. So we're going to do blue first. And these are stackable. It's almost like layers in Photoshop. You're not creating layers, you're actually stacking effects is what you're doing. So let's take our blue channel here and get this started. We'll do it about there. So here we're in the blue channel, so you see the histogram for the blue. This is where the blue lives. If you're over here, you're affecting the whole picture, not just the blue channel. And even here you can affect the whole picture if you go too wild. But this is where the blue lives. This is where we want to be. So now let's go to the red channel. Because you look at old Polaroids, they kind of have blues and reds and all sorts of weird things going on all at once. So you can bring that there, and then if you wanted to, you could even get into the green a little bit. I know some like old Polaroids have kind of some green, weird haze going on to them as well. And you can create essentially a retro matte to a photo. This is just the example I've given today. Again, mess around. Go channel to channel. Come back to the RGB. Now, because we're stacking again, the red, you see here, the red adjustments, the green adjustments, all the other adjustments we made are still intact. And we can go further with this. Let's see, I messed up when I put that other point there. Let me get rid of that point. So you can tinker and mess around. Now, if you wanted to, if you got something somewhere where you're happy with it, and you're like, you know what? I have a series of these photos, and I like where this is at as a starting point, and then I can tweak it from there. I don't really use a lot of presets. We have a ton on here. You know, my wife bought all these packets from this one particular artist, and she liked them, and they're fine. I prefer to do stuff manually, but there's times that a preset can help. But so let's say this is a base point. This is what I do. When I create a preset, I have a series of photos, all of the same person, in the same lighting, in the same atmosphere. I will create I'll do a base development and create that preset, or I sync across all the photos to give me a launching point. So and then I tweak everything from there. So let's say I want to create a preset with this. I already did when I was getting ready to make this video, but we're going to just do it again. Retro matte. And we're going to create it, and we're going to replace what's there. So now, that's now here, and I could, if I had 7, 8, 15 more of her in a similar setting, and I wanted to use this as a base and fine tune it, I could. Now we're going to go to a different example here. Now this is Lindsay Reed, another one of our models that we use. And let's hypothetically just throw this retro matte on her. Is it not bad? It works. And then from here, we could adjust it. We could go into, back up into here, bring in maybe more of that blue again, and adjust this more. However we would see fit to want to have it. But for her, we're doing a split tone with her, so I want to get rid of this preset in general. So what I wanted to show you now was split toning, which is down here. So we're not living in the tone curve right now. Now we're going to focus on split toning. So for split toning, you're working in specifically 2 channels, highlights and shadows. You can actually work in one if you wanted to, simply by not turning up the saturation or by moving this all the way one way or the other. So when you're working in your split tones, skin, especially Caucasian skin, it exists in the highlight realm of light. So when we're setting our highlight color, we want to keep it in that yellowish orange, so that we're not altering the skin tone more than we need to be. And for shadows, I like, the bluish purples. You can do greens. You can do whatever you want to do. In this example, I'm kind of still working on that retro matte feel. So you have highlights are set to yellowish. This is set to a bluish. Now we're going to bring our saturations up in these. And so you're already, just by adjusting our saturation, we can already start to achieve a neat effect here with kind of these color schemes. But then you have this wonderful little balance bar. And with this, it's almost like once you set your 2 colors, this basically becomes almost like a temperature slider or a gradient slider. So if this is all shadow, that's all highlight. So now you can kind of come in here and find that sweet spot where her skin tone isn't too off base from where it should be, but you're still getting a lot of those tones coming in from the shadows. And this is another way you can create different effects just by adjusting the tonal sections in the modules in Lightroom. So I'm happy with that for the purposes of what we're doing here today. Like I said, I'm a very basic developer. The most advanced I do is once in a while a gradient filter or a radial filter or brushes. The whole tone curve and split toning thing, this is stuff that I'm getting into now to create specific effects for specific purposes. This is definitely probably a beginner tutorial, but there's a lot of people who are more advanced who probably don't even mess with split toning because they're using Photoshop or other things where they're creating that effect through other means. But this is really just to demonstrate the power within Lightroom, stuff that Lightroom can do that maybe not everybody's aware of. Now I have one more sample here today, and it's not really tonal. It's not really toning. It is in a way, but it's more color channels. So when I do a lot of nature photography, I love skies. Skies are one of my passions. And if you expose for the sky, you have a ton of work to do on the subject. Now, when we're doing portrait shots, we always expose for the sky, and then we'll pop the model with our monolight or something like that. But what do you do? Okay, so here it was a very bright day out. I tried to capture some of the grass in the trees, and you can't see them here as we round this bend. There's a couple of very large alligators. This is Magnolia Plantation outside of Charleston, South Carolina. So we got a couple of birds swimming in one area, drying them off here on one of these alligator ramps. And but it was more about the sky. So the HSL module, saturation certainly can help you work on a sky, but it's luminance that's really going to bring your skies to life. So let's just say for saturation, let's turn up our blues and the aquas. And the reason I say that is if you pick this selector and you pick somewhere in your sky, if you watch the sliders, you see it's not just the blue, it's the blue and the aqua. There's a couple of different channels active there. So you can turn that up, but what really brings your skies to life, come here to luminance. This dictates how much light a particular color channel will allow through. So, you can kind of drab them out or you can bring them to life. Now, drastic adjustments to this will create some artifacting. You see the cloud up here, it's looking kind of grainy. So when you do adjustments with this, you almost want to do it like steps, so it's more of a curvature. And that tends to cut down on the artifacting a little bit. But I mean, that'll really bring your skies to life, making those adjustments in your luminance. So that's just a little bonus tip. This probably wasn't the best example. It's just a picture I had literally available that I imported. I have much better sky pictures out there. But it's a quick example to show you about, while we're talking about toning, how nice the luminance can really make your skies come to life. So that's about it. That's what I have for you today. I hope it was informative. I hope it kind of gave you some ideas. We didn't get too detailed in any one thing, but it's, like I said, this is probably more for beginners or people who don't really get into the split toning too much. Give you some inspiration to get in and try. I mean, tinker, take the same picture, reset it 20 times, and just try to keep creating different effects. If you found this video useful or entertaining, please give us a like. If you like the content we're providing, we're always trying to provide new content, fun content. We're actually starting a interview series where we're interviewing people who influence us and basically ask them, well, what influenced them? We already have Manny Ortiz and Jessica Whitaker. Scott Robert Lim is on board. We still are not finalized, but making arrangements with Matt Granger and a few other people. Trying to get some of these photographers. Some are YouTube celeb photographers Others are more real world, photographers. So you may not have heard of all of them if you're really a YouTube person and you watch a lot of YouTube photographers' videos. You may not have heard of all the photographers we're going to be interviewing, but it's a really good thing to find out what inspired them, what equipment do they use, what do they carry around with them each and every day. It kind of it gives you some good insight. So we're excited about that. We'll be doing some. For right now, they're going to be recorded Skype calls until we can figure out a better method. But that should be cool. So if you're interested in that or any of our other video series, such as the A9 video series we'll be producing once our cameras arrive, which will include my full menu walkthrough and customization as I did for the 6500. Subscribe, turn on notifications. Don't miss it, because it's going to be some good stuff coming up. Again, this is Big Dan Bates for Bates Photography saying thank you for joining me. You can check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/batesphoto.net. You can check me out on Instagram, Daniel Bates Photography. My wife is Eileen Bates Photography. And, of course, on the web, www.batesphoto.net. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.